Hey guys, welcome to Telling the Told and Untold. My name is Tshego. Before we go straight into today's video, I do have to give you guys a content warning. In this video, I do talk about assault, so if that's something you think you're not interested in watching, then this video probably isn't for you, so maybe you can watch some of my other videos or just wait for my next upload. Have you ever heard of a killer who was remorseful and pleaded not to be let out? This was Bongani Mfeka. He went up to the investigating officer and pleaded with him to make sure that he's never released from prison. He said, "Please don't ever let me out of prison because I'll kill again. I can't help myself. That's where I belong." In September 1996, a woman was running down the street and she was hysterical. She was screaming, she was naked, and a taxi driver saw her, pulled over, put her into the car and drove her to the Kranskop police station. There she told police officers what she had been through and that a man had raped her, and somehow she had managed to escape, but not before biting off a piece of his hand. Immediately, police officers called the Kranskop clinic and told them to let them know as soon as a man walked in with a piece of his hand bitten off, because it wasn't an injury that the perpetrator could just ignore. He needed medical attention. And on the 8th of September, 32-year-old Bongani Mfeka was arrested. Bongani was immediately taken to the police station, and this is where the police officers were interrogating him. But there was something off about him. They looked at him, they thought he was very aggressive, but he didn't speak to them. He didn't answer any of their questions. He didn't want to. And they thought it was a bit strange because for them, he had just raped a woman and they had enough evidence to convict him. So they just wanted to ask him a couple of questions, because as far as they thought, he would just go to prison for the rape and he'd be out in a couple of years. He can't deny that that happened. And they also had a weird feeling about him that they couldn't explain, and there was just something really off about him and the entire interrogation. This is when Pete Blyeveld was brought in. Once Pete Blyeveld was assigned the case, he met Bongani and he thought there was something different about him. Bongani wasn't aggressive like you would think a rapist would be. He was very quiet and polite. So Pete Blyeveld decided that he was going to ask Bongani a couple of questions, but before this, he was going to take him to an area where he and a lot of other police officers would go to after a long day in the office, or when they just needed other police officers' opinions. They would usually just go there, they would drink, have conversation, and sometimes they would be there the whole night until the sun rose and then go back to the office and continue investigating what they were busy with. So on this particular day, Pete decided to take Bongani there so he could also see just the other police officers, and he bought him a loaf of bread as well as a bottle of Coke, and Bongani just sat down there with Pete and all the other officers, and he was just listening to them speak and have conversation. And because of the environment that he was in, he felt very comfortable enough to look at Pete and tell him that he needed to tell him something. And this is where Bongani confessed. He confessed to murdering countless of women. It was confession after confession after confession. As he spoke, Bongani seemed to be very emotional and remorseful. And this is where they discovered that the man they had taken in for one rape turned out to be a serial killer. Bongani Mfeka grew up in the former hills of Natal in a hut near Kranskop, and he had a very troubled childhood. He had no relationship with his father because his father couldn't stand him. His father was very cold and distant. However, his relationship with his mother was completely different. His mother was the head of the household. She was domineering and very overprotective over Bongani. But growing up, their relationship went from a mother-son relationship to a very weird, awkward relationship. Like, Sigmund Freud would have a field day with the relationship that Bongani had with his mother. Once he was in his teenage years, his mother decided that she would help him sneak women into his bedroom so he could have like his sexual gratification, but make sure that his father never found out or never saw him. And his mother even said that sometimes she would help Bongani sneak even 2 girls at a time into his bedroom. It was just very weird. Bongani was also extremely intelligent. He managed to get to standard 8, which is grade 10, and after this he went looking for a job, and eventually he found one in a mine in Randfontein. And he never got married, never had any children, and he would constantly travel between Randfontein and Kranshoop to his parents' home. He was so smart, but it's so unfortunate that they didn't have enough money to give him the opportunities that would, allow him to maybe have a different life. After Bongani had confessed to all these murders, they decided that they can't just take anything he says at face value. So they decided to call around and confirm if the murders had taken place and if there were murder dockets opened about the murders that he had confessed to between 1994 to 1996. And indeed, they were there. And it turned out that Bongani had been telling the truth. Bongani's first victim was when he was living in Valverendert near Carltonville. He was living with a woman who was a bit older than him, and she was sort of like a mother figure. And they then decided that they were going to move to Kranshoop. So they had packed up everything and placed all their possessions in Bongani's car, and then they set off to Kranshoop. They hadn't even been in the car for a long time. It was a very short amount of time, probably less than 15 minutes, when Bongani decided to pull over to the side of the road and on impulse decided to kill the woman that he was with. He then set off to Kranshoop all on his own with her possessions still in his car. This lady was later found lying in a veld with head injuries. He also confessed to killing a child in Vireda in the Free State. She was hitchhiking and Bongani pulled over to give her a lift, and as they were driving, he had this urge and he just couldn't control himself. He then pulled over, raped, and killed her. In Kranshoop, Bongani then pointed out a further 6 more murder scenes. One of the bodies they had found had been so decomposed that there was barely anything left. They found pieces of her skull, some of her ribs, scraps of clothing, and a few teeth. But fortunately, her family were able to identify her with the scraps of clothing that were found. Confessing and returning to the crime scenes apparently gave Bongani a sense of closure, almost as though he had all of this weight on his shoulders and it was finally lifted and he was able to clear his conscience. Bongani's hunting ground was at the Kranshoop taxi rank. So he would climb into a taxi and there'd be other women around him, and he would tell them that he had like a job opportunity for them and they would be able to work on a farm. And during the conversation, he would basically just convince them to climb off with him, and they would be walking to the farm where this lady would see like this new job opportunity that this man had. But as they would walk through the veld, Bongani would stop, and this is where he would sexually assault them and afterwards murder them. What he would do is stop them in the middle of their tracks, tell them to lie on the ground on their stomach. He would then climb on top of them and simultaneously strangle and rape them. He did this to 8 women. 4 of the 8 bodies were found within walking distance of his parents' house. They also searched his bedroom in his parents' house, and this is where they found some woman's clothing, a purse, as well as a diary. And in this diary, he had detailed everything about his victims. He had detailed the date, the exact time, as well as their names. Bongani said the reason he killed was because he had a thing for dresses. So if he saw a woman wearing a dress, it would sort of set something off inside of him, and the devil would come out, and he would just kill on impulse because he couldn't control himself. He just couldn't. 3 women had managed to escape. The one who had bitten off a piece of his hand, and the other 2 had pleaded with him. They had pleaded for their lives, and somehow he felt really sorry for them, and they had promised that they wouldn't go to the police station and report him. So he decided to let them go. 1 year after Bongani was arrested, the trial finally began. But before they went to court, Bongani asked to see Pete Blyeveld. So Pete went to the prison to go see Bongani, and Bongani asked him to please tell the judge to make sure that he is never released from prison because he will kill again. Unsurprisingly, Bongani Mfeka was found guilty and sentenced to 8 life sentences for murder and 2 life sentences for rape, a total of 112 years. The names of the victims were not released to the public, so I can't tell you anything about them. And I know this case was a bit short, but every case is important no matter how long or short it is. And yeah, that's it from me today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave any comments you have down below, like, subscribe, and all that jazz, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.